All right. This is another episode of the Life Coach Lounge. I am here today with Alton Chislam, and it's an honor to have you on the podcast. We've been trying to do this one for a little while now. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but you are a coach that focuses on emotional self mastery. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll let you introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm definitely an emotional self mastery coach. I've been doing that for the better part of the last 2 years. I kind of stumbled upon this part of coaching mainly through my mentor was Peter Sage, and it's kind of a space that I was really passionate about. And emotional self mastery coaching, I guess to put it in a quick summary, is basically helping people find the root of their issues or their anxiety or their stressors, like what's the emotion behind that, and then how do we attack that emotion and make sure that it doesn't come up repeatedly or be out of control.
Gotcha. Nice. And when you worked with your mentor, what was it that stood out to you at that time, in regards to emotional self mastery?
I guess basically what stood out to me the most was the way he packaged it. Like a lot of people, they make incremental improvements and they don't quite figure out what the actual problem, and they take on a lot of more information. They try to they just pick up more books and try to learn more and more and more, but they're not actually working on themselves. And so that kind of like really registered because I'm always the person to go buy a new course or go take a new training, but I never stopped to think like, wait a minute, what's stopping me from getting to that next level? Why do I always seem to need like more books? But it was me not knowing about myself and what my patterns were that were like the self-sabotage patterns that I couldn't figure out. Being able to understand my own emotions and the way you packaged it like made so much sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, and when it comes to you, you said like you would buy more books
Yeah.
but then you like the mindset changed, like what if I start focusing on these emotions and like taking that a little bit further?
Yeah.
What, if you don't mind sharing, what are some things that you did learn about yourself when you decided to take that approach?
Yeah, I was learning that my self sabotage is primarily coming from fear of success with like a combination of fear of failure. So I would get to a certain point where I'm starting to succeed and I would make an incremental step above where I used to be, but I'm still not where I want to be. And I would like become complacent. I would just stop. Like, all right, I'm
Mm.
good here. I'm good at this level. And I would kind of stick with that level for like a year or so. And I was trying to figure that out. And I'm like trying to figure out the patterns because I like, so consciously, I didn't think I was self sabotaging. But then when I thought about it, I was like, oh, that's what I was doing. It's like, oh, well, you should be doing this or working on this, but instead you're like taking a extended break or you're going off and doing something that isn't really productive in terms of what you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that in my own way. What are some ways, whether it's personally or just in general,
Yeah.
that you would say that people do self-sabotage, like a couple examples that people find themselves doing?
Well, I'd say the biggest one is just constantly pushing things to the side that they know they should be working on, whether it's conscious or subconscious. It's like because basically what happens is our nervous system gets so used to doing one thing, and when we start to make changes to our norm, it freaks us out. We're like, whether it's conscious or subconscious, like I don't want to do this. And our brains and our body is just telling us, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. So you'll go find something else to do. And I know it happens with me like fairly often. Like I'll try to sit down and read something and I just won't remember a single word. So I'm like, well, you know what? Time to take a break, gotta reset. So I'll go for a walk and then come back to it, and then I'll be able to actually get through and focus it. But in the past, I didn't know that that's what was happening. I just like, I don't want to do this, and I'll just go leave and I won't come back to what I was doing.
Yeah. What type of emotions would you say come up when you're on that you're on that journey or path, like or desire to change things,
Yeah.
but you feel that resistance? What emotions come up and what are they telling us in those moments?
Yeah. I'd say they're different for each person. So for me, like I said, it was a fear of success, fear of failure, but also very common is imposter syndrome. Like
Mhm.
you may have all the qualifications in the world, but you feel like the next person is smarter than you are, or they've done this for 3 years, or they have a master's degree in this subject, and you've just taken some online classes. So how do I compete with that person? Instead of thinking, oh, I don't need to compete with that person. I just need to be a year or two ahead of whoever I'm trying to help. And
Mhm.
once I established that mentality, I stopped with the self-sabotaging and the imposter syndrome, because I don't need to be the person who's been doing this for 10 years. They've been doing it for 10 years for a reason. I see to help the person who's, maybe 3 or 4 years into their journey. Just so I'm just further enough ahead of them and I'm still able to help them.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. All these things, like I said, I can relate to in one way, shape, or form. Just to share a little bit about my experience, when I decided to go back to school, that was actually an environment where I found myself feeling the imposter syndrome and comparing myself to others. And I was challenged by that a few times as I was moving through my education. And it's tough, but the way you just described that and the way you're talking out loud, almost as if to yourself, like for me, those were the conversations that were helpful, is whether it was alone or talking openly with someone else about what I was feeling
Yeah.
and the feelings around the imposter syndrome. Um, that was the most helpful because it was a way for me to kind of ground myself and to say like, look, like you can do this, you've just got to stop like almost putting yourself in this position where you feel very inferior and you're not acknowledging all the strengths that you actually do have. Instead you're focusing on all of the weaknesses. So
Yeah. That's very true. I had a client call yesterday, and that was one of the things I told him. I'm like, when was the last time you stopped and thought about all of your accomplishments? Because he was sitting there like, oh, I don't think I should do this. I don't deserve this. And I'm like, when was the last time you sat around and just thought about that? And then when he thought about it, like, well, I've done this, and this, and it's like, yeah, you fully prepared. You do deserve this. But
mm-hmm.
we're our own worst critics, and like that
Yeah.
emotion is very strong in a lot of people.
Yes, yes, that's very true. As you know, I know we can't go into too many details about who you're coaching and whatnot, but did you notice as they were describing that there was an immediate shift in energy?
Yeah, definitely an immediate shift in energy, because they're talking to themselves out loud now. It's no
Mhm.
longer in your head.
Right.
And like my life coach told me a trick, and once I've been using that trick, it's been huge for me, because
Hmm.
I consciously don't think I have self negative talk, but subconsciously I do. And
Hmm.
so what she said was, hey, you ever thought about saying your name every time you have a subconscious negative thought? And so whenever I would say my name and then add that negative thought, I would just immediately stop, because I never like to talk about myself in a negative way. And that was just like a game changer for me. So like
Hmm.
whenever I get caught in one of those like downward spirals, I'm like, if I say Alton is bad or Alton's not good at something, I just immediately stop. I'm like, I know I don't believe that.
Yeah.
That was a good big tool for me that I use, and I've been passing it on to my clients as well.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate you sharing that on here. I hope anyone that's listening tries that or wants to practice that. Um, Yeah, yeah, I love that. Just directing things towards us. And then it almost raises the question, if you feel that way, when you insert your name and you say
Yeah,
something negative about yourself, I think one of the good questions is, would you ever say things like that to someone else, or would you be supportive? And more often than not, we would jump in to support anyone that's in our circle, right? We would be
yeah,
like, no, like you're not bad at that. Like, let's talk about your strengths. We would try to talk about all these positive things and, reframe their their uh their reality for them. But sometimes we forget to do it for ourselves. We
yeah.
forget to like just turn inward for a minute and direct things back to ourselves. Instead, I feel like we're always just looking outside of ourselves. So I see that as a very useful tool.
Yeah, I agree. Like we just don't spend enough time taking care of ourselves and talking to ourselves in a positive way. And we
Mhm.
spend most of our times in our own heads. So I'd say we should do a lot more of that.
Yeah, nice. Now that we're talking about emotions and we're talking about positive, negative, what are your thoughts on um like when we do accomplish stuff or just speaking to ourselves in a more positive light more often, and also the subject of toxic positivity? How do you make sense out of all that, and where's the line, at least in your opinion, where positive thinking, positive thoughts, or just focusing on too much positive emotion, does that ever become a problem, I guess?
I guess it depends on how you use it, right? So toxic positivity is just it's gonna be okay. it may not be okay, right? So that's toxic positivity. But positive thoughts when something bad is going on, and like letting someone know that you're here for them, that they're feeling those emotions are okay, and you're going to be there with them on the journey to get back to whatever their new normal is going to be. But
Mhm.
that's to me is a better form of positivity than saying, "Oh, it's just going to be okay," or "Keep your head up," or "You've been through something like this before," because that hurts. Have you ever been in
Mhm.
a situation where you're really feeling down and like no one's actually hearing you or listening to you? They're just giving you random positive thoughts, and it's like you're not listening to me. You're not
Yep.
like these emotions that I'm feeling are real, and I don't feel validated. So my thing is, if the person isn't validating your emotions and they're not like letting you know that things may not be okay, they may not be perfect, but I'm gonna be with you on this journey as you find your new normal. So that's
Yeah.
kind of my thought process around it.
Yeah. The one thing that comes up in my mind when I hear you describe that is um, just that feeling of, like you said, not being listened to, but also feeling like, in a way, whether they realize it or not, almost like this feeling of being dismissed. Like
Yeah,
everything about your reality is being dismissed as like it's not that serious. It's all good. And it's like no, like in that person's world at that point in time, the emotions that they're feeling, wherever their mind's going, it's not all good. And like you said, I like how you describe that as like it's not necessarily all good, but there is a way to offer support and talk to people in a way that you can like just tell them that like, look, it's not all good right now, but
yeah,
let's talk about why it's not, and let's also talk about what it looks like when it starts to get better or how we can make it get better, right? Like
yeah.
something strategic, something practical, and turning it into something essentially.
In the very beginning, I don't even try to give practical steps. I just want you to feel your emotions and process it.
Mm-hmm.
There is a way out, but I don't want to take away from the fact that they're feeling this right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because then they're going to need to sit in that emotion for a little while. But once they're kind of feeling a little bit better, then we start going into practical steps. Because when in the onset, they're so emotionally stuck in their head. If you try
Mm-hmm.
to get a practical step, it's going to immediately go back to, oh, they're dismissing me. Like
Yep.
they're not hearing me. They're not letting me get this out of my system. And so I'm very careful around like dealing with like those types of emotions and stress because you just don't want to turn someone off in that when they're feeling that way because it's just things aren't going to process to them logically at that point.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that too. Just because I'm hoping it didn't sound like I was saying, things that would make someone feel dismissed, but I think what you just again shared is again just what your understanding of emotions coming from a place
Yeah.
as a coach that holds space for people in this way. And the one thing that came up is you said processing these emotions. I just had a podcast with someone else recently where we really took time to talk about what processing meant for that person in particular.
Yeah.
But what is it? What is it like to hold space for someone to process emotions? And like, what would you say the benefit of taking time to process those emotions? Like, what are those benefits? What is it that is really helpful for people in kind of exploring that?
I think when people get the chance to process their own emotions, they get to at the end find the positive in that and then find the steps within that while they're processing it.
Mm-hmm.
So we're sad for a reason. Like we're upset, we're angry for a reason. Sometimes it's the very easy top of mind reason. Sometimes it's for something completely different. Like very often we'll get angry and we'll snap on someone, but really it's because it's something that's been pent up that we haven't addressed in like the last 3 months or a year plus. And so just if you actually sit there and you process it and you talk it out loud, and I'm holding space for that person,
Mm-hmm.
they're gonna, the more they talk, the more they're gonna realize, wait a minute, this is the real feeling behind this. This is what has actually happened. I'm really sad about this. This just so happened to set me off, and that's a beautiful thing. Like when people like find that out.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess when it comes to coaching, just to put this into context, when you say something like someone could have been holding on to something that when they're, more or less triggered by that out in the world by some factor or some event, that overwhelming sense of emotion kind of erupts, right? Like
Yeah,
it surfaces, and I'm almost thinking like it almost seems to represent that in some ways not processing those emotions,
Yeah.
not figuring out where they're coming from is also hindering the developmental process of who we are.
Yes.
Because if it keeps recurring over and over again, you're stuck in a cycle. And instead of understanding where that emotion is coming from, you just keep running into the same problem over and over
Yeah.
again. And at this point, I just want to know, like, what are your thoughts on that?
You're exactly right. So like most of my clients are men and they have a lot of pent up emotions that they haven't dealt with over a long time. And they're starting to see that materialize in their relationships. And it's like they may have found the right girl or they think is the right girl, or they're about to get married. Like I have like a ton of clients in that space. And they're now finally realizing it. Wait a minute, this is not why I'm really upset. This feels like something I haven't addressed.
Mm.
And so like that is a good realization, but a lot of people don't get that early on. Like it takes some time or it takes the right person in their life that they're willing to make that change for. And then they
Mm-hmm.
start to get it like, okay, I need to process this. I need to actually work through these emotions and dig through and find whatever traumas underlying that hasn't been worked on or hasn't been addressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, and relationships are very complex. You know,
Very
we're complex individuals, and then you put two people
good.
together, and it just becomes that more chaotic. So I can imagine taking time to do that is very beneficial. Um, yeah, there's just a lot here. Is there anything in particular that you want to talk about, just in terms of more experiences about what you do as a coach, how you bring that emotional self mastery into that, and maybe just some more nuance to this conversation?
Yeah. So basically what I do as a coach is I work on people with emotional self-awareness, emotional self-mastery, awareness of other people's emotions, and then relationship management. I always leave relationship management to the end, but it's not a linear line. So there'll be pieces like that interchange throughout it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's primarily based off of a book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0 and my own personal experience. So until you figure out yourself and you master your own emotions, you're not going to be the best partner for someone else. And so I work on helping you figure out your own emotions, your triggers, like what upsets you, what makes you feel happy. And then once from there, you start to work with other people, start to notice other emotions around you. Like this person's happy, this person might be manipulating me, but you're able to pick up these emotions quicker because you've done so much of the work on yourself. And then
Mm-hmm.
from there, you can start to adjust those relationships appropriately by setting like the right boundaries or catching it very quickly and noticing, hey, this person is just trying to manipulate me to their will. I'm going to shut this down and I'm going to shut this down in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
From there, your relationships get better because you know how to manage people and how to manage yourself. And it becomes a much better situation. And that's kind of the journey and path that I went on. And a lot of it, like I said, was built off of Emotional Intelligence 2.0 and then another book called The Way of the Superior Man. So those two books really helped me set my foundation.
Nice.
And so I work with that with my clients. And then once we've kind of gone through that space, after the relationship piece, some clients stay on for mindset coaching. But mindset coaching isn't my specialty. But I do specialize with working with business owners. And so that's when it kind of comes into play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear, like, when you're describing figuring out our own emotions and then becoming aware of, emotions in other people. I think
Yeah.
that almost kind of shows that mastery, right? Like
Yeah.
understanding ourselves first and then being able to pick up on other people when they may not even be able to recognize it in themselves.
Yeah.
And another thing that's coming up for me is, being in various workplaces. I don't believe that I'm a master of emotions. I believe that I've always been more focused on mindset, and we talked a
Yeah.
little bit about this.
Yeah.
So I really try to, learn as much as I can from you. And when I hear you talk about emotions the way that you do, I'm really just trying to register all that and then think more deeply about my life. But I will say, like, I feel like I have been able to notice, certain things about myself and then also certain things about others as well. And there's kind of like reality changes because it's like you see like people erupting at work. Like, let's just say they get really frustrated, and all of a sudden that frustration almost changes, like you see somebody change right in front of you from a person that's working doing their job to someone that all of a sudden is like, screw this, and like mad, and they start talking to people in a different
Yeah,
manner, and language changes, and all of a sudden you can just tell like they're very like fired up. um and I feel like just to be aware of that, like not only to understand the emotion, like that's one thing, but also to understand how am I going to respond when it's not even like myself that's fired up, but someone else, right? Like,
yeah,
because we can only control ourselves really to a certain degree, but when someone else is doing it, we have to figure out how am I going to respond to this person, especially when they're in this place of,
yeah.
really just fired up emotions. And yeah, it's just interesting because I think like it just raises a lot of questions like, well, what do you do if you're a person that, you know, is in tune with those emotions? Or, if you're not, what do you do? And like, I don't know. I guess like I don't know what questions are here, but it's very intriguing to me how the emotions play a role within the workplace and around other people.
Yeah. I think like all people in management positions should definitely take like an emotional mastery class because at the end of the day, like you're going to spend more time with your coworkers than most other people. I mean, we know
Mhm.
there's a lot of Zoom stuff now, but you're still interacting with people.
Yeah.
I'd say my best bosses all related well to my personality type. Like my personality type is I like to work hard, but I don't like to be confined, if that makes sense. Like, don't tell me I need to be here at 8 and I need to leave by 6 and it has to be this, and this. That doesn't work well for me. Or just saying, hey, I want this high quality product. It has to be done on this day and this time. So the deliverables are strict and what you want done is strict, but you're giving me the freedom in which to do it on my own. And so that's when I work the best because that's my personality type.
Hmm.
Like a good boss can recognize that when you need to, pull back, let that person kind of have autonomy. And when there's the person that, what, they really need somebody to spoon feed them or to like give them a lot of structure because they're not used to working without structure. But
Hmm.
because I've primarily been an entrepreneur, so that's the way my brain thinks. It doesn't think structure 8 to 5 or 8 to 6. And I think once you have like those types of bosses that have that ability to like read the people and to manage those personalities, it works a lot better.
Yeah.
Another thing you had brought up earlier was like dealing with like difficult personalities and difficult coworkers. And I've been on
Hmm.
both ends of the spectrum. And I could tell you about the feelings that came up when I was younger. And it was because I felt like when my ideas were being stolen, I would come up with an idea and I would present it, and then my boss would take that idea, and my boss would then go do it, and then my boss would get the credit. I'd get like a small bonus, but like my boss's name is on this, and it's like, wait a minute, I did this, and so that starts to build up resentment. And then I've had those situations like snowball into other situations, and I'm like, wait a minute, now I'm just feeling like I'm not being valued here, and I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, well, let me try to save face, right? Let me show that I want to stay with this company. So I want to join a specific program. And then I put in the application. I'm definitely qualified for it. And then I hear nothing. And I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, now I'm fed up. Now I'm the angry person in the office because I don't feel valued here. Like I just want to get out. And then eventually you get out, you leave because you don't feel valued. Now I had
Right.
my boss had come to me with a different approach saying, hey, um, how can I give you credit for this? Like how can we show that you are the person you sure it was my management direction that led to the execution. You were the one who executed. How do I make you feel comfortable about that? Like that would have been worked out much better for me. And I'd probably still be there.
Right. Like had they talked to you about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
And
also, I also think, there's in part there's responsibility on us that when these emotions do surface, that if we take time to figure out where they're coming from, I think like anything else, we can figure out how to express that to someone like our manager. And in a way, after you give it some time, you understand where it comes from, and you say like, look, like these are all the things that happen. This is the way that it's making me feel, and these are the reasons why it's making me feel that way.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that you can at least be straightforward about everything that's going on. But, staying true to this conversation, that piece about how you feel is exactly what we're talking about. It's the
Yeah.
emotional, and it is signaling something to us about our reality, about the
Yeah.
events that we're experiencing. So again, it's always there. It's always there in the background. I think if anything, this podcast episode is to say that the emotions are not to be ignored. there's information there, you know?
Yeah. And like I wish I at that age, I was like 23 at that time. I wish I knew how to manage up and I wish I knew how to like control those emotions. But like anger is a secondary emotion. Like the main emotion was I felt taken advantage of and I felt disrespected. But
Hmm.
it came out in anger because I didn't know how to communicate that.
Yeah.
I love working on learning how to communicate my feelings. Like, okay, let me sit back. I know I just got angry and I snapped, but what's the feeling behind that? Okay, I found
Hmm.
the feeling. Now I know how to communicate this. Hey, I felt disrespected. I felt taken advantage of. And that's something that, I'm super passionate about now. Like,
Hmm. Right. It seems like that's where the coaching comes into play, is
yeah.
recognizing that yourself, that there's a way that you can, again, become a master of your emotions. And the other piece I do want to talk about, I'm glad that you brought that up, is just when we don't have a firm grip on the emotions, what are various ways that you've seen those emotions kind of come out where, like you said, like anger and frustration, but when that turns into behavior, and when you're in a very emotional place, like
Yeah.
deeply emotional place, like sometimes you're not thinking clearly either, right? So the emotion quickly becomes a behavior that has consequences.
Yeah.
And so I guess my question is like, what are some examples of how that is problematic, which again would lead us to how emotional self-mastery is very
Yeah.
beneficial?
Just on a very top level, like outside of the anger, like potentially snapping on someone, but also insecurity. Like you're always going to feel like someone's attacking you or someone's talking about you because
Mm-hmm.
you're not in control of your own emotions. And like your ego or your nervous system is always designed to protect itself. So it's going to always assume that you're right and this person's attacking me or trying to hurt me or steal my credibility. Like that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unfortunate that it happens that way. But once you learn about that, you're like, okay, maybe let me actually ask what's going on. Maybe this
Yeah.
person isn't what I'm thinking. It's not what's in my head. But a lot of us, we have a whole conversation in our head, put an entire story that doesn't exist, and then take it out on the next person. And
Yeah.
so emotional self mastery helps you avoid that.
Right. Right. Like, it's, instead of making a bunch of assumptions about everything that's going on, it's just trying to get to the truth of the matter. And
Yeah.
if it's involves someone else, asking someone else about it, those assumptions can definitely get us into trouble. And yeah, the insecurity, like that can be really challenging to deal with too. I've had certain insecurities in my life growing up, and yeah, it just creates a lot of challenges. Like, is that something that you see often, insecurities coming up where people are being challenged by that?
Yeah, so that's a one of the most common emotions that I see within my clients is it's an insecurity, but they just recognize that it's an insecurity, and that's like the best part. Like now you know that what this is, so it makes it easier to deal with. Most men don't know that that's what it is. They have their own set of beliefs that are already there, but now
Mm-hmm.
that most of my clients that are coming to me are ready for a change, and they're like, oh yeah, man, it's like I just created this whole situation and I was like upset because of this what happened in my past and like these patterns exist and that's what it is like your brain is like going to like the nervous system and it's like this is what happened in the past so this must be what happened to me right now instead of saying this is a completely different person, let me
Mm-hmm.
not take this pattern and apply it to them, let me go ask them and talk to them. So basically trying to get rid of like confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nice. I'm there's so much here. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about today, that you wanted to use this podcast to just discuss or to share anything? Is there anything specific?
Um, outside like the relationship management piece, I'd say like, well, that's like to me like the biggest piece. It's always at the end. I
Mm-hmm.
think that we could all be better people if we took the time to actually talk and like ask questions instead of making assumptions and going and like maybe like reconciling a relationship or a friendship that your ego stopped you from doing because you didn't want to seem like you're wrong or too small of a person. You just never know how it's going to change. And I think that's like just some positive feedback I like to give because I know for me, I've gotten a lot of closure doing that. And some friendships have been like reunited and other friendships have ended, but it was a really good closure. Like, hey, I don't like the way things happen. I'm glad we're both adults and we can talk about this now, but we don't need to continue our relationship. But great closure. And other friendships were like, man, we're just kids. This is really stupid. We're adults now. We can actually talk through this, like, so to improve those relationships.
Yeah.
I think that's good. Just, healing the world, creating better relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure. I've had a few, I feel like, relationships in the past where they did just kind of end and it did feel like there wasn't closure,
Yeah.
and when that happens, there is always just like that question in the back of your mind, like, man, what happened? Right. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that can weigh on us a little bit,
Yeah.
because relationships are something that I believe bring us a lot of meaning in our life,
Yeah.
like the way that we relate to others, the experiences that we get to co-create with one another. And yeah, so it's interesting. And what's interesting too is every part of what we talk about always comes back to the conversation or finding the language to describe what was going on. And so would you say that, again, just being open to just talking more about emotions is the thing that drives change, is the thing that drives us to grow and learn more about who we are and just become masters of the emotions?
I would definitely agree with that. I think the more comfortable we get with talking about our feelings out loud and not being ashamed of that, like the better off we're going to be in our relationships. Because most people in a lot of cultures, I know specifically in the Black culture, like that's frowned upon. Like we don't talk about our feelings. And me being the person I am now, changing my family's dynamic and working with other people, like our family's getting closer, our bonds are getting closer. I found out that my sister thought I was a terrible person. They thought I was a terrible big brother, not a person, but a terrible big brother. And I'm like, wait, what? Because I was just there for them financially, but they didn't feel like they could come to me emotionally. And I'm like, oh, I was taken back by that. I'm like, what do you mean? And then now, like now hearing them say that to me out loud, I'm much more supportive of a brother. I'm like, hey, what's going on? How you doing? How's my niece? How's my nephew? Like, you want to go hang out, grab food? Like, being the a better big brother because we actually talked about it. And so I
Yeah.
think it always will improve relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate you sharing that about your family. And yeah, I just love hearing that. Like that makes me smile because in my mind, when you say that, I can just imagine how that would change things and just, to have someone think one way about you and then to be able to use the conversation as a vehicle to drive change within the family and with people that you care deeply about, like,
Yeah,
and turn it into something beautiful, and it's not going to be perfect moving forward and there's going to be more challenges, I'm sure, but you're addressing some of the things that, again, weren't being addressed prior to that.
yeah,
So really, really powerful.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I love this conversation about emotions. I almost feel like having a conversation like this for, a substantial amount of time, um, for me, I'll probably start to even be more aware of, my emotional responses after this. Like, especially like, as soon as this conversation ends, whatever it is that I do, I just feel like there's going to be just a little bit more of an awareness. And I feel
yeah,
like for anything, that's always the first step, is creating an awareness. We do that in coaching, just creating awareness around our behaviors, our thoughts, our emotions,
yeah.
and they're all integral parts of who we are. So yeah, I love this conversation. And like I said, I don't, it's like I'm not a master of emotions, right? By any means.
Yeah.
I tend to focus on the mindset, but I see this as a fundamental piece of, again, learning more about who we are.
Yeah.
So, and that awareness is key. So I appreciate you sharing all that.
Yeah, the first step is definitely to become consciously aware.
Mm-hmm.
So when you become consciously aware of your own feelings and your own emotions, it's it's a beautiful thing. And then as you make those changes, you'll become subconsciously aware, which means you won't have those same negative reactions anymore. You'll have better reactions and better positive reactions because you've now shifted your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the end goal, is to subconsciously not even have to think about like how I'm affecting this person because you're so used to it that it just comes to you naturally.
Yeah. I have another question real quick. Um, this just came to me, but like, I'm sure there are people that when they think about, oh, like expressing their emotions, like seeing that as a form of weakness, right? Like, why would I need to be able to show all my emotions, and why would I need to be vulnerable? And I guess my question is what would your argument be for why it would be more beneficial to be vulnerable and to understand the full spectrum of your emotions
Yeah.
as opposed to the other way around?
So I'd say that showing your emotions, it makes you vulnerable, but it's more of a strength. Like if I feel comfortable enough to tell you how I feel, regardless of your feedback, that means I'm strong, right? Because that means because people judge, right? That's most humans are in that state of like, I'm going to judge this person for their behavior. But once
Mhm.
you get outside of the good opinion of other people, or what Peter Sage calls goop, like you're now doing this to become a better person. You're not thinking about, oh, this person's judging me, or I need to look good for this person, or I don't want them to think badly or think I'm too emotional. Then you're that's where you want to get to. And I don't showcase or talk about every single emotion that comes up, only the emotions that trigger me. And
Mhm.
I know that word is very used very often now for all kinds of things, like you're triggered. But if
Mhm.
this causes me to shift how I'm feeling about myself, or how I'm feeling about a situation, that's what I consider triggered. And I'm gonna talk to you about that. It may not be right in that moment because that moment may not be appropriate,
Right.
but I'll talk about that moment later. And I've had plenty of those moments with friends where it's like at the time it wasn't the right time to bring it up. But once we're alone, I'm like, hey man, like I don't like how you talk to that person, how you handle that situation. But I was never gonna call you out in public and make a scene about it. But I
Mhm.
don't think that was cool. And then they'll have their response and I have my response. But when you're good friends and you have a secure relationship, like you'll come to a conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and just not shoving things under the rug, right? Like, because you're missing the opportunity to explore why you felt that way emotionally
Yeah,
and what was really going on. And I think that's kind of what we've been talking about this whole time, is just using these events and these emotional responses as a way to learn more about ourselves and to grow, and using conversation, which we talked a lot about today, just using that conversation, whether it's with ourselves or with other people, as the vehicle to drive that change, to
yeah,
openly express and articulate what it is we're feeling and why. And that's all that's the data. That's what we can use to move forward. And so I
yeah,
love that. And the last piece that I heard you say that I want to pick out is when you talked about not worrying about other people's opinions and you know being above other people's judgments, and because that the intention that you have is to be a good person, is to be a
yes,
better person. Like, I think that's even getting to a deeper level of what we kind of like what guides us in life itself, right? Is,
yeah,
if I want to be a good person, then it's like, where do emotions play a role in that? And so
yeah,
you're starting at this deep level of like, I think a good person would be figuring out how to have these hard conversations and
yeah,
figuring out how to be stronger as a person and to continue growing and learning more. And so again, I love that you said that piece, because that definitely resonates with me. I think that's something, that question that comes up in my mind all the time is, am I being a good person? And
yeah,
then it's kind of like, from there, we can look at various things that we do in life and how we respond to events, and we
yeah,
can start to answer that question for ourselves.
yeah.
So,
And it has to be a good person for you, right? Like, what's a good person for Alton? What's a good person for Leroy? Like, that's what it has to be. Like, if you're trying to be a good person for someone else, that means you're still worried about someone else's opinion.
mm,
And so that's an important distinguishing piece, because I've definitely been on the other end where I felt bad. People made me feel bad about being a good person, but for me, like, no, this is who I am. This is what I want to do. And then it took me so long to be confident in the fact that if I choose to do this and that is what I think is a good person, then you can't make me feel bad about caring too much. You can't make me feel bad or wanting to help this person out and take care of this person. And
mhm.
so I'm just in a much stronger place when it comes to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for adding that. Yeah. That's a great way, again, a great distinction. And also, just trying to think, because you just made my mind like just go crazy with that. But trying to like make sense out of all that. Um, I might
Yeah,
have to sit. I might have to sit with that one for another
yeah,
minute. I had something I wanted to say, but that's like now we're getting into like, okay, let's build on thoughts that aren't completely there yet. But no, I appreciate you adding that. I can't wait to listen back to this and honestly hear that piece because that's going to give me a lot to think about and to continue exploring. But yeah, I mean, we're getting close to the hour. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about today?
Along this line, I think we've covered a lot. Are there any specific questions you have, or like, are there like tips I can give to like life coaches out there that are listening? Something like that, maybe?
So yeah, I mean, this podcast is again, I feel like hitting multiple audiences. I think we're talking to coaches about the work that we do, about our specific niches that we
Yeah.
bring to the table. What we focus on today is all about emotional self mastery, which I love. And then there's also the target audience of like clients that just have questions or people that are just interested in self development and want to hear about these things and want to feel like they're a part of the conversation. And yeah, I mean, when it comes to that, like, I think if you had any additional tools or practices that have been really helpful for you, I think honestly, that would probably be a great way to maybe end this is just to share anything that you think people could use in their daily life. Like maybe like now that we're at the end of our episode, like what is a practical thing or two that people can start to do in their life?
Okay, I can do that for I'd say about for two audiences. So the first audience for the live coaches that are listening, I'd say it's much easier to find clients that are going to align with you when you specifically spell out what you're offering and
Mm.
you're talking to a specific person. So when you talk to that specific person and you're solving those specific problems, you're going to attract those clients, and you won't be out there fishing as much because it's very clear. So for me, I work on three pillars of emotional mastery, and I'm mainly working with people who are in a leadership position. So it's easy for me to create a target market and target sentence for that draws in those type of people. And I'd say for people who are out there who are trying to figure out like how to deal with their emotions, if they're someone who very quickly gets to anger, the first thing I like to do is I like to take deep breaths. So I take 5 deep breaths. The first two are normal. The last three are kind of halfway in, then go all the way in deeper. And then I
Mm.
like to stop and sit and think about the emotions from my heart and my head of why am I actually triggered right now? And then when I find that, I'm like, okay, this is the actual emotion that's happening, not the anger that reacted to that emotion. And that allows me to then start a conversation with a person. Because you don't need to, and I don't recommend trying to talk to someone when you're mad or being guilt tripped into talking about something when you're mad if you're not that type of person. Take that time, walk away, breathe, figure it out, and then come back to the situation with a clear head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you gotta do a quick reset, right? Reset the nervous system, come back where you can actually have a conversation. Because I think we're all very well aware that when we are triggered by something and there's an immediate shift in our emotional
Yeah,
state, it's hard to think. It's hard to think clearly.
yeah.
So yeah, just taking some time to reset. And I love that. Love talking about the breath work and um, yeah, thanks for sharing that. Again, hitting multiple audiences because I think we have a lot of different people tuning in. So yeah, no, I appreciate all this. Like I said earlier, today was really me just trying to take this approach as like just a student today, I feel like. And I just feel like I'm learning a lot. And I feel like everything that you were sharing has just given me a lot more to think about. And I appreciate the tools at the end. Um, yeah, I'm just really happy with how this went and again, what we're offering to the world.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I feel like it was a really good conversation. I didn't even know we were at an hour.
Yeah, no,
Just flowed really easily.
it's time actually flew by. I feel like I got really lost in that. And I know we talked about, a lot of other things that may come up in our conversation and we didn't really get a chance to touch on those. That's usually how most of these go.
Yeah,
So maybe in the future we'll have a chance to do that. But for today, this was just a great conversation. So thank you for coming on here.
thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, to the audience, be well.